Welcome to another video with me, Christian Rauchenwald. Now in today's video we are going to look at direct registration and the alternatives to it, or in other words, the different ways of how you can hold shares and how to make sure that you actually own the shares that you bought. But before we get to that, as always, let's get the usual disclaimer out of the way. Everything that I share in this video is my personal opinion and in no way financial or professional advice of any kind. You should always do your own research, consult certified professionals, draw your own conclusions and make your own decisions. To get started, let's first cover the different ways you as an individual investor can hold your shares. First, the probably most common option would be in so-called street name, which happens whenever you buy shares at your regular broker. In this case, your broker keeps a so-called book entry on their end that confirms that you are the owner, but nowhere outside of your broker's computers and databases does it say that you actually bought or own the shares. At this point, I'd like to mention that even in this case, technically the shares are still owned by a company called Side & Co. and not even by your broker. Your broker actually only has contractual rights that are part of a chain of contractual rights and then also extend to you. And while I'd like to dive down that rabbit hole, for the purpose of this video, let's just simplify this by saying that whenever you buy shares through your brokerage account, only your broker knows that you bought them, and only your broker keeps a record in his database that confirms that the stocks the broker bought for you actually belong to you. Moving on, besides that, for a shrinking number of corporations, you could also request a physical share certificate, in which case you'd actually receive the stock certificate in, you guessed it, physical form, and you would also be the official owner in the books of the issuer of the shares in the first place. In other words, there would be an entry in the corporation's books or more often at their appointed transfer agent stating that you own the shares that you bought. Unfortunately, not only are there less and less corporations that support the issuance of physical share certificates, but even if the corporation you're investing in still supports this method, you'd be looking at costs of up to $500 to get your certificate in the first place, and it also would require you to actually deliver the certificate physically back to a broker if you ever wanted to sell those shares again. There are a few other downsides to this, but I guess it's already clear from the few things mentioned that the downsides clearly outweigh the benefit of holding shares in form of physical certificates. However, for those among you that really would like something to put on their wall, you can still get a replica share certificate at GiveAshare by following the link in the first pinned comment or the video description down below. Fitting to the topic of this video, if you request a physical share replica from GiveAshare, it also includes one actual share of the company that will be directly registered for you, which brings us to option number 3 and the actual topic of this video, direct registration, or in short DRS. When you directly register your shares, they are actually registered in your name, similar to if you were to request and own a physical share certificate, and either the company itself or in most cases the company's so-called transfer agent keeps them for you in book entry form. The book entry here differs from the one your broker would make when you buy shares through them, because the transfer agent of a corporation is a trust company assigned by the corporation for the purpose of maintaining investors' financial records and tracking each investor's account balance. To illustrate this better without diving into the aforementioned rabbit hole, we can take a look at this illustration from drsgme.org, a website that provides information about the direct registration process specifically for GameStop shareholders. You can see in the bottom left part right below outstanding shares that there are two options. The one in orange would be the beneficially owned shares, so those you buy from your broker or bank and that are actually held by Side & Co., where only your broker keeps a record reflecting that you actually bought the shares. And to the left we can see the registered ownership shares without a middleman in between that would reflect the shares you directly registered. For those shares, your name and the amount of shares you hold is entered in the company register, and as a result those shares are withdrawn from the depository trust company and no longer owned by Side & Co. And that removal of Side & Co. as the owner of your shares is a very important point we are going to circle back to later in this video again, after covering a few more basic things about direct registration and transfer agents. A corporation's transfer agent is also responsible for the distribution of new shares in case of stock splits or stock dividend payments, and the probably most well-known transfer agent nowadays would be Computershare, that acts as the transfer agent for companies like Alphabet, Amazon, American Express, AMC, GameStop, and many others. Now, the easiest way for you to directly register your shares would be to file a so-called DRS transfer request with your existing broker, in which case your broker would transfer your shares to the responsible transfer agent, which would then trigger the account setup procedure if you don't already have an account with that transfer agent. As popular investor at eToro, I also want to add here that this unfortunately does not work for any shares you hold at eToro, since eToro at the time of recording this video does not support any kind of in or outgoing transfers of your shares. Whenever you buy shares on eToro, those are held for you in a so-called segregated omnibus account, meaning that your shares and those of other users are held in the same account, and eToro just keeps a book entry on their end to determine how many of those shares in that account belong to you and how many belong to other users. If you would want to directly register shares you currently hold on eToro, the only way you would be able to do that would be by selling your shares on eToro and then using that money to buy them again at a broker that supports direct registration, like for example Interactive Broker, also known as IBKR. If you want to do that, you can find a link to IBKR in the description and the first pinned comment down below. You should, however, first consider any potential tax implications that might have. To give you an easy example, let's assume your tax residency is in a country where you have to pay 25% tax on profits made within the first 12 months of holding and no taxes if you hold your shares longer than 12 months. If you now have shares in your eToro account for a few months already and you sell them to buy them again at, as mentioned, for example, IBKR, to directly register them, you would have to also pay the 25% tax if you had any profit so far, and the 12-month counter would then start again the moment you buy those shares again at IBKR. On the other hand, if you already hold your shares for more than 12 months in this example, you could sell them without paying taxes on any profit, but the counter would then start again the moment you buy them again at IBKR. In other words, it depends on your tax residency if and under what circumstances moving shares from eToro to the corporation's transfer agent makes sense, and you'll have to consider that for yourself. Either way, once you requested a DRS transfer at IBKR or another broker that supports transfers to directly register your shares at Computershare or another transfer agent, you would receive a letter via mail to create your account, followed by a second letter to actually confirm your account. Those letters can take quite some time to arrive, especially if you are outside of the United States, although Computershare also offers a paid-for express shipping service that you can request through their hotline. Once you received both letters and verified your account at Computershare, you can manage your directly registered shares in your Computershare account and also buy more shares, including shares of other companies that are handled by Computershare, or sell some or all of them if you don't want to hold them any longer. However, it's worth noting that Computershare is not a broker, and if you want to buy more shares, the purchase is executed only once per day, which means you don't know for sure which price you'll pay for those new shares. Besides that, Computershare also charges a fee for the sale of shares, and at the time of recording, that fee would be $20 plus 10 cents per share sold. So if you sell 100 shares, you would pay $20 plus 100 times 10 cents for a total of $30 in fees. As a result of all this, holding shares at a transfer agent only makes sense if you plan to hold shares for a longer period of time and want to be sure that the shares are actually officially in your name and not just linked to you by some entry in your broker's database. Another important side benefit of holding your shares at the transfer agent is that, as mentioned, those shares are no longer owned by Cedar & Co. and as such also can't be lent out to short sellers anymore. Now, just in case you haven't heard about short selling so far, people and institutions that want to bet against the corporation you invested in can borrow shares in certain ways and sell them on the market to buy them back at a later time, and either pocket the difference if the price per share fell during that time, or cover the difference out of their own pocket if the price per share increased. So without diving too much into this new rabbit hole, it's clear that short sellers are out to harm your investment, and while many brokers offer their users an option to specifically opt out from share lending, there have been enough cases over the years in which brokers lend out their clients shares anyways. However, once you directly register your shares, they can't be lent out anymore, and as such reduce the available number of shares that short sellers can borrow. At least in theory, because there is also so-called naked shorting, which would be selling a share without actually borrowing it first. And sadly, despite the fact that this practice is in most cases illegal, with some specific exceptions for market makers, it's still an ongoing practice that hardly gets any attention by the SEC. In theory, if all outstanding shares of a corporation would be directly registered, there would be no more shares to borrow left, which would be a way to prove that all shares still circulating are actually illegal naked shorts. There's obviously a lot more to this, but for the purpose of this video you should now know at least why it's worth considering direct registrations for shares that you plan to hold for a longer period of time. Not only are you the actual owner of those shares in that case, but also the side benefit that those shares are then no longer available in any form to borrow for short sellers that are aiming to harm your investment should provide a decent enough incentive to start investing directly through a transfer agent like Computershare in all the cases where you plan to hold your shares longer. Anyways, that's it for today. If you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to leave them in the comments down below or on any of my recent posts on eToro. Thanks for watching, see you in one of my other videos. Till then, bye bye.